Hello, Michael.
Hello.
Today we have a question. I'm going to read it. It says, the question is about two words that you use, subside and disappear. If I look up the dictionary, subsidence means to become less intense, active, or severe. But sometimes it seems to me that you use the two words interchangeably. In verse 8 of Nan Yar, Bhagavan says, to make the mind subside permanently, there are no adequate means other than vichara. Are the words subside and disappear synonyms, or is there a single difference?
Depending on the context, there are some words in Tamil. Two words that Bhagavan often uses are adangu and odungu. They're two verbs. And he also uses causative forms of those verbs, which is adaku and oduku. Depending on the context, these can be translated as subside, cease, dissolve, disappear. They all have generally the same meaning, but the choice of words I use to translate them may vary according to the context. One example is a noun form of odungu is odukum. And in verse 13 of Upadēśa Undiyār, Bhagavan says that odukum is of two kinds, laya and nasa. In that context, dissolution is a suitable word. A temporary dissolution is laya, permanent dissolution is nasa. In other contexts, I may choose other words. It depends on the context. For example, I mean, you mentioned one example in Nāṉ Ār, paragraph 8. What Bhagavan says in paragraph 8, in the first sentence, is here he uses, the verb he uses is adangu. And he says, for the mind to adangu, except vicharana, there is no other adequate means. Here, in this context, he's talking about not just the temporary or partial subsidence of mind, he's talking about the cessation of mind. So here I translated adangu as cease. But I put in brackets, settle, subside, yield, be subdued, be still, or disappear, because it covers all these meanings. But when the mind does subside by other means. When we retire, the mind subsides in sleep. So what Bhagavan implies in this context, he's talking about the permanent cessation of mind. But in other contexts, the same word could be used to mean just a temporary subsidence, or it could mean also a partial subsidence. I mean, a complete subsidence of mind, in other words, a dissolution of mind, is either laya or nasa. In laya, though the mind is completely dissolved, completely subsided, doesn't exist there at all, it is only a temporary state, whereas nasa is a permanent state. So about disappear is one of the meanings of this group of words. So in some contexts, it may be appropriate to say disappear. If something, for example, the mind dissolves in sleep, it disappears in sleep. We could say either. So it depends on the context. It depends on the context, but all the meanings generally give the sense. I mean, if I take one of the words, that is one of the words Bhagavan uses a lot in Nāṉ Ār, is adangu. And the range of meanings they give in the lexicon is to obey, yield, submit, be subdued, to shrink or become compressed, to cease, to settle, subside as dust, to disappear or set as a heavenly body, like the sun sets, to be still as the mind of a sage, to be comprised or included. That's not really applicable in this context, but one uses this word in that sense in other contexts. And in verse 5 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, when he said the body is a form composed of 5 sheaths. Udal Panchakosa Rupa, body is a form of 5 sheaths. Therefore, all 5 are included in the term body. The verb he uses here is adungu. It's the same verb, but here it's used in the sense of include. So these, it's according to the context that we have to translate the verbs, and it's sometimes difficult with one word in English to bring out the full range of meanings that the Tamil word has.
In the context of practice, for example?
In the context of practice.
When you turn within,
yes.
in the waking state, for example, I wouldn't say the mind disappears.
It doesn't disappear, no. But it does, to the extent to which we attend to ourselves, to that extent will the mind subside. Because that is, when we say disappear, we can say partially disappear. Some partially disappeared. You can't see it very clearly. You can still vaguely see it through the clouds. In that context, you can say it's partially disappeared. But usually, when we use the word disappear, we mean it's completely gone.
It sounds final.
Yeah. Whereas in the case of in the case of the practice of self-investigation, to the extent to which we attend to ourselves, to that extent does the mind subside. As you say, subside gives the idea of if there's a flood and the waters go down, you say the flood has subsided. It also is used in the sense, as you say, from the dictionary definition you gave, is to become less intense, less active, less severe. So subside is actually quite a good word to use in this context, but subsidence can be partial or can be complete, whereas disappearance usually implies complete completeness. So in sleep, the mind disappears. When we're practicing self-attention, it doesn't disappear, but it does subside to the extent to which we are self-attentive.
Yeah, I mean, words are not absolute, of course.
Yes.
Yeah, but in the context of practice, when you turn within and the world is still there, and some thoughts come every now and then, and things. Subsidence makes more sense to me because it's relative or partial. Disappearing.
For example, in the first sentence of the 6th paragraph of Nāṉ Ār, Bhagavan says, Nāna enam vicharane inalaye manam adangam. There he's using that verb. If we translate it here as subside, the meaning would be only by the investigation of who am I will the mind subside. Well, that's clearly not the case, because mind subsides in sleep, for example, and the mind can subside by pranayama or other means, even or by any meditation that keeps the mind, that subdues the activity of the mind. To that extent, the mind is subsiding. So the sense in which Bhagavan uses it here, he's implying the permanent cessation of mind, because there are other means to bring about temporary cessation of mind. The only means to bring about the permanent cessation, in other words, manonasa, is the investigation, who am I? And the same idea is repeated in slightly different words in the first sentence of paragraph 8. Manu madangavadaku vicharane tavira veritahantu upayangalile. That is, for the mind to cease, except vicharana, that's except self-investigation, there is no other adequate means. And then he says, if it's made to cease or subside or disappear by other means, it will remain as if it has ceased, but will again rise up. That's there he's referring to the either partial subsidence or to the temporary cessation, as in layer. So we by, and then he goes on to say, even by pranayama, the mind will cease. So that's there he's referring to. It can be taken as pranayama will restrain the mind. It'll reduce the activity of the mind. We can take it in that sense. But in the context, because he's talking about when he says it's there's no other adequate means to make it subside. He's referring here more to cessation. But by pranayama, the mind can cease. In other words, you can bring about manolaya by pranayama, but he goes on to say, however, so long as prana remains subsided, the mind will also remain subsided. And when the prana emerges, it will also emerge and wander under the sway of its vasanas.
So in these two ways of using the word, like when you say in deep sleep, the mind disappears. It's completely a complete disappearance, but it's not final disappearance, of course.
Yes, exactly. It's a complete but temporary disappearance.
Exactly. And when we practice, it's neither complete, neither a final disappearance.
No,
of course.
It is a, well, it depends. It is to the extent to which we are self-attentive. We could, to explain it in a way, we can talk about trying to turn 180 degrees. When we're practicing, we're trying to turn 180 degrees, but we don't actually ever turn the full 180 degrees. To the extent to which we do turn, to that extent we bring about the subsidence of mind. So if we bring about, if we manage to turn 179 degrees, the mind will be almost completely subsided, but still there'll be some residue of awareness of other things. But when we turn 180 degrees, then the subsidence is complete and final.
So that gives the idea also when you say 179 degrees, when you turn, and there is a residue of experience of awareness of anything.
Yes. Because
that could imply that there is a graduation in your experience of.
Yes, well, I mean, when we're practicing self-attentiveness, we can be more or less focused on ourselves. That is, even in the midst of other activities, when our mind is partially on other things, we can be holding on to what Bhagavan used to refer to as a current of self-attentiveness. That there's a tenuous current, there's a background of self-attentiveness, even while we are doing other things. Obviously, then we are not turning, we are only turning partially, because we're still aware of other things. But to the extent to which we turn, if we turn 179 degrees, we've almost turned our back on all other things, but there'll be some lingering awareness of phenomena, of things other than ourselves. When we turn 180 degrees, then we've turned our back completely on all other things. So even the slightest trace of any awareness of anything other than ourselves disappears. And then we remain in the state of pure awareness. And it's in that state that the mind, I mean, as soon as we experience that, the mind is destroyed.
Well, does that mean that when Bhagavan, when Takaraman, when the minute before he disappeared and he realized the self, his experience was in a way like more, I mean, he was more subsided than we, for example.
Yeah, I mean in Bhagavan's case, it was almost instantaneous. Though Bhagavan described it in words later, just it was more as a guidance to us that Bhagavan described it in words, but he made it clear. Well, what happened? It happened just in there wasn't any thought process involved. It happened in an instant. That is, as soon as that fear of death came, his automatic reaction was to turn within to find out, when his body dies, will I die? Though he said that in so many words, he made it clear, but he didn't actually go through the thinking process. That was the, as it were, the unspoken motivation that turned his mind within, and it all happened in an instant.
Yeah, exactly. It's because we are used to saying that. Yeah, it's gradually our experience will feel different in a way when we are turned like 170, 75, 79 degrees, and
Yes,
then but
yes.
I mean we cannot tackle that. We could, I don't know, maybe in 3 days.
When we
The
say
next
our experience
turn,
is different, it's not that we're experiencing anything new. That
yeah.
is what we experience when we turn, for example, when we turn 180 degrees, what we experience is only I am. But we experience with full clarity because everything else is removed. Now we are experiencing I am, but mixed up with adjuncts and with awareness of other things. So the difference in experience is to the extent to which other things are removed from our awareness, other things recede to the background of our awareness. For example, when we are keenly focused on being self-attentive, we are hardly aware of anything else because our attention is so keenly focused on ourselves. But there's still some lingering awareness because we still have lingering attachment, so we're not ready to let go entirely.
And that is the purification of the mind.
That is the purification of mind. That is the impurities in the mind are the Vishaya vasanas. Vishaya vasanas means our inclination to go outwards. Those Vishaya vasanas will remain so long as there is ego. But by this practice of self-investigation, we are weakening our Vishaya vasanas. We become less and less inclined to attend to other things and more inclined just to attend to ourselves, just to know and to be what we actually are. So it's a process of a weakening of the Vishaya vasanas and strengthening of the Sat vasana. That is what is called purification of mind. Because the impurities are only those Vishaya vasanas. So the weaker the impurities, the Vishaya vasanas become, the more pure the mind is.
Yeah. So it is important to understand deeply the meaning of these words. Just like when you study philosophy or some other discipline, that you have to know in what terms.
Yes. But
Bhagavan uses,
this is a very Bhagavan's teachings are very much subtler philosophy than general than most other forms of philosophy, because it's very subtle. That is, the subject Bhagavan is talking about is something that cannot adequately be expressed in words. Words are very useful for talking about phenomena, for talking about things that we experience, but words cannot describe the experiencer. We cannot. So it's words are always inadequate in this. So how we have to look upon Bhagavan's words are pointers. So Bhagavan generally in Tamil, he uses sometimes he uses technical terms, but on the whole, like these verbs, adangu, adongu, these are very simple Tamil words, which could be used in day-to-day life. And as I say, they're more or less equivalent, but slightly depending on the context: subsidence, disappearance, dissolution, cessation. It covers all these. So which one it is, we need to understand from the context. So more than looking for a single definition for each word, we need to see each word in its context and understand from the context what it implies.
Yeah, yeah, I get it. Yeah, it's not that we have to be focused on the exact meaning, literal meaning,
No.
because
If we try to focus too much on the exact meaning, we're missing the point, because the, the that's why Bhagavan said ultimately the ultimate teaching is only silence. What the words are doing is pointing, they're acting as pointers, and we need to understand what they're pointing at. All of Bhagavan's teachings ultimately are pointing back at ourselves, turning our attention back towards ourselves. So we need to understand any words in the context in which Bhagavan has used them, and we have to we have to interpret them against the background of the fundamental principles of Bhagavan's teaching, the principles that he's often reiterating.
Yeah, right. Yeah, because with words, you can never be so precise that
No,
you have to
you
make
can't.
this concession, of course, with this, and you have to make concessions to one. But yeah, the perfect precision, it doesn't exist. Yeah.
And ultimately, the words are like a radio signal. You've got a transmitter and you've got a receiver. How well the receiver receives the radio signals and interprets it into, the receiver receives the radio signals and converts it back into audible sounds. Like that. So if you've got a faulty receiver, it won't be interpreting the radio signal clearly. There'll be a lot of background sound. The words won't be clear, or it may not be able to make any sense of it. So what matters most is the receiving set. That is, Bhagavan is broadcasting very clearly, but within the limitations of the capacity of the words. But to what extent are we receptive to his words? To what extent are our mind and heart in tune with what Bhagavan is pointing out to us? That's Bhagavan. Sometimes when his teachings were misinterpreted, Bhagavan would say, according to the purity of the mind, the same teaching reflects in different ways. So it's inevitable. We will each understand in our own way. But if we are sincere in trying to put what Bhagavan has taught us into practice, and if we are often referring back to his words, we will understand them more and more clearly. That is, the real clarity comes from our practice. But his words are a great support to our practice. So the more we understand his words, the more deep we'll be able to go in the practice. And the deeper we go in the practice, the more we'll be able to understand his words. So the key to it all is practice.
Yeah.
That's where the real clarity comes from.
Yeah, that is a good analogy, the one with the radio.
Yeah.
The way we receive things.
If you see a map of a place you're familiar with, you'll recognize all the features. The map will be very meaningful to you. But if someone shows you a map of a place you've never been to, you'll only get a very vague impression from the map how it will be there. You can't form an accurate picture in your mind of how that place is. Whereas if it's a place you're familiar with, every symbol on the map, you will recognize what that is representing. So the more we go deep in this practice, the more meaningful Bhagavan's words will become to us.
And the more you visit that place, the more the easier will be to
exactly.
map to.
Yeah.